Today I'm going to talk about owning the M3. I guess I've had it almost 2 years now, and it's more of like a long-term owning, modifying, maintaining, all the rest. It's not really a cheap car to own. I've found that out. I bought a good example, and it had a lot of really good maintenance history, been well cared for. The important subframe recall had been done, the Vanos had been done, and that was two of the major expensive tasks. So I decided to go with the one that I got, mainly because I really wanted Imola Red, and I was quite lucky. I'd been to look at one, really didn't like it. I kind of felt like my hand was forced, because at the time I had an E92 335 and I really did not get on with that car. It was just a minefield of problems constantly, probably on a weekly occurrence. Something would break, belts, everything. Yeah, it's too long to go into, but I was desperate to get rid of that car, and I almost ended up with a carbon black E46 M3. It had red leather, which I wasn't massively keen on because I'm not a hairdresser, and the sunroof, I didn't really want a sunroof either. It's a little bit more desirable in warmer countries, I guess, but I'm a little bit finicky about things that probably don't matter, like centre of gravity and having weight up at the top, and probably something I wouldn't even notice, but I just overthink things. So I decided to go with this one, and when I bought it, it was virtually standard apart from the eyeback springs and the polyflex bushes throughout the whole of the rear end. When the subframe had been done, all the subframe bushings, diff bushings, the carriers and the rear suspension was all polybushed. And to be honest, it makes a big difference in making the car feel really modern and tight in comparison to worn out rubber ones. So I hadn't really had the car too long, and I decided to start modifying it, which isn't really a cheap thing to do. I started off with, I think the first thing I bought was the carbon lip and the diffuser, which wasn't too expensive, but I then got a little bit carried away and went down the route of other parts. One of the biggest things on a car, I guess, is wheels. I actually downsized from a 19 to an 18 and went for a square setup, which, if you're not aware, means it's a 18 by 9.5 all the way around, all four corners, as opposed to a staggered setup, which is the standard car. I think it's an 8 and a 9. I much prefer the look on 18s. It sits a little bit better, and the lighter weight, that's a big thing for me. The rotating mass, and another thing that I'm overthinking that I might not really have noticed, but I noticed certainly with a square setup it turns in a lot better. The front end feels a lot more confident, and it doesn't have that real push understeer as much as what many standard cars are set up to do that for safety. This tends to more lean towards oversteer at the limit, which is a good thing. It sits ever so slightly too high for what I'd like, but I've toyed with the idea of coilovers. Hit and miss. The standard suspension is actually really good and it handles really well, so you'd have to get a really sophisticated coilover system for it to work well, and a lot of people just throw on cheap rubbish, and whether it works as well, I'm not so sure. So at the minute I'm still on the fence a little bit about that one. I don't want to compromise the handling for this little small arch gap, which is pretty insignificant really. So a big part of owning it, I guess, is the maintenance. When it came round to brakes, I realised they were really expensive because they're a two-piece brake, two-piece disc with a floating caliper. So when it came round to doing brakes, I realised that if I paid a little bit extra, I could then get the big brake kit, which I got a good deal with that. So it was kind of, the modifications came with the maintenance at the same time, which took me to the engine, which was the big one. If you've seen the recent video, I had to virtually rebuild a lot of the engine, head gasket, shells, rod bolts, hardware, top end, Vanos. I went through everything, new oil pump, which was maybe a little bit of an over precaution, but if you spend that kind of money, it's virtually nearly 25% of the value of the car, and to replace the engine could cost up to 50% of the value of the car or more. So it's not really a good idea to spend that money in to cut corners. So if you do buy one of these cars, be prepared that within a few years you might have spent what you originally bought the car at. So I guess what drew me to the M3 was partially a bad experience with a turbo car, which I didn't really get on with, and I didn't like the way that it made power. So I was kind of tossing it up between the 335 and the M3 at the time, and I've owned quite a few E46s over the years, non-M versions, and I shortly realised that as soon as I test drove an E46 M3 it was exactly what I wanted, and I'd made a mistake. I guess now it doesn't really matter because I kind of balanced and I've ended up with a car that I liked, and it was a learning experience, breaking down all the time, and yeah. But the naturally aspirated engine is a big thing for me because it's something that's phasing out. Modern cars with emissions and economy, it's not really feasible for companies to build naturally aspirated cars anymore. So another thing, I guess, with buying a car this kind of age, you need to expect that you might have to do some body work. When I bought the car there was a very, very small dot of rust on the arch. I left it a little while because I thought, no big deal, just a little spot of rust. It turned out to be quite a lot more, and it was actually both sides. Both inner arches have been replaced and repaired. Basically the full rear end of the car's been painted, again pretty expensive. So something to consider if you are looking to buy an older car, really, I guess, is body work as well as maintenance. It's not necessarily a cheap thing to do. I guess the running cost of this, I could have had something a lot newer if I'd wanted to, but I don't. So a big part of the reason that I bought the car was, as I kind of mentioned, the bad experience with the 335. It sort of put me off turbo cars. I bought that with the intention that the N54 engine was good for making big power, and I plan to kind of do like 500-600 horsepower as a street car, and it just didn't do what I wanted it to do. I don't know, I guess it was the first turbo car that I'd owned and I didn't really get on with it, and I went back to my roots. I'd already had 3 E46s before, and I guess as soon as I got in it I felt at home, but it just felt like an enhanced version of the other E46s that I'd owned, and it just did everything that the other cars did, but much better. I really like the S54 engine, the high revving, naturally aspirated. It's very raw feeling, it gives you a lot of feedback, and it's just something I haven't really found in a lot of other cars. I think if I wanted to replace this car I'd struggle without spending serious money, and that's why I've justified to myself that if I spend money on this car, it's not money that I could have spent better elsewhere, really, I guess. The only thing I've driven that gave me the same sort of feel that I really liked was 997 GT3, and they're getting like 4, 5, 6 times the price of this with the mods, so it makes sense to me, and I do really like the car, so I guess I'll be keeping it longer term, unless I do find something else, but I don't think I will. Another reason I got the car, I guess, is it's a good balance of everything. It's a fairly basic interior, but it does everything, and it's functional, and it doesn't rattle and squeak, and it's not overly luxurious to the point where you feel like you're sat in an armchair. So it's got a good kind of balance, and I guess that's the best way I could describe this car, as a balance of everything, and that's what really appeals to me. There are a couple of things I'd like to do just to tidy it up a little bit. I'd like to change the steering wheel to Alcantara. There are some like really small details that I really like. It's got like the tricolour M stitching around the steering wheel, and I'd like to keep that when it's retrimmed. Another thing, which is kind of only a small mod I guess, but it makes a big difference. I've got the E46 540i shifter, which is like a short throw, slightly shorter throw shifter. The stock one's really long and feels a little bit rubbery. It's kind of strange. I've driven a few stock ones and this feels so much more direct and precise in comparison. I guess it's something a lot of people have picked up on driving these cars over the years. It's little details like controls. I think the Alcantara steering wheel will make that another bit of difference towards that. It'll give you that little bit of extra feel a little bit more special without doing something major. Kind of a little bit hidden at the moment. The diffuser hides it quite well, but I have agency power axle back. It's the only one I've actually seen in the UK, although I believe other people have probably got them. They come from the USA. It's a lot louder than the standard exhaust. I guess one negative thing I could say about this car from factory is it is really quiet. It's kind of dull down the noise of the car. This is maybe a little bit loud in terms of cold starts and on a morning. Sometimes I feel a little bit bad, like driving by people's houses on an early morning. But the noise when you push it up into the revs is worth it, so I guess people will just have to live with it. So as I mentioned, the short-term plans, I guess the steering wheel is going to be something I'm definitely looking into doing, and I want to get the whole car detailed and ceramic coated. It gets driven daily, and I guess the paint kind of takes a beating really. It's difficult to keep clean in the winter, and I just want to have that little bit of extra protection. So that'll be the next thing that'll be coming up on this car. I kind of touched on it already, but if you're ever looking to buy something like this, I still believe it's the best car in its class, and it's one of the last naturally aspirated driver's cars that you can have a lot of fun with and still drive comfortably. So it's kind of the whole package without any major compromise. So I would recommend this to anyone, and I don't have any plans to sell it anytime soon. I can't pay my bills.
Don't buy an M3.